one of the companies I founded over the years called the Joldos Group, one of our core values the company's still going on. One of the core values is uh, that we wanted to live lives that invite inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
And we would share that with customers. That they would say, "What does that mean?" Well, it's what you just said. Is that we want to live? We tell them point blank. We weren't shy about it. We are Christians. We actually prefer to use the term followers of Jesus because of the Muslim world where we work. And we want you to be able to look at us and ask us why and know where we're going with it. Over the years, I can remember I was in Kyrgyzstan, for example. We were setting up a university over there, and my Russian partner, not business partner, but collaborator, she asked me, she said, "So you're a Christian, right? And this is a Muslim country." And you don't immediately go, "Well, yeah, I'm a Billy Graham Christian." I mean, you just typically don't do that because of the history of the Crusades mainly. So I said, I am. I said, I prefer to be called a follower of Jesus, but you're correct. Why? And she looked at me, big smile on her face. She goes, "I just thought so." Well, that to me was incredibly validating. And she and I, over the years, had many, many in-depth heart conversations because of that exchange. She could see it and I could say it at the same time. So let's go to the hard places for a moment. I'm thinking of a particular brother that we've worked with over the years in India. And it's, I can tell you that up in northern India, where it's much harder to be a Christian than in the southern part. And he was criticized one time because he didn't have any Christian insignia on his business, not on his sign or his card or logo, anything. Criticized quite severely by an American brother who obviously had never been there and didn't understand the setting. For this guy to do that would pretty much be to put a box of matches and a can of gasoline in front of his business and say, "Anybody who wants to come by and start the fire can go for it." I mean, it could be incredible. And I'm not suggesting he's a coward, quite the opposite. He's very brave where he lives. But he's in one of those places where to brand myself as a Christian, I am a Christian, could be incredibly threatening, not only to his business, but to his family, to his employees, to himself physically. How would you advise somebody, and I'm going to the extreme because that's a way to make a point,
Yeah.
but Justin, how would you, with your background, and I know you got a heart for missions, and we both have YWAM in common, there's a lot of things we think alike about. How would you advise somebody like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are organizations. There's one we interviewed a dozen faith-driven business leaders, more than a dozen for the book, and did case studies. And one of the companies that I really love, in their founding statement, they explicitly said, "We want to make a Christian statement in the marketplace." But not everyone that works here has to be a Christian. We want everyone to know what we stand for, and yet we are going to be a place where you can come and you can grow and you can be a part of what we're doing. And I think that's one way to do it. I think in situations like you're mentioning, man, there are so many creative, subtle ways to start to show your faith without actually explicitly coming out and saying it. Movement Mortgage talks about love and value. You're just going to hear them say love and value, love and value, love and value over and over again. And after a while, you're like, where does that come from? Right? They're taking us one step closer to their heart and to their purpose. We talk about the fruit of the Spirit here at Grove 9. There's 9 of those. And that's people resonate with love and joy and kindness and goodness and faithfulness. And, I think there are some really interesting creative ways that you can start to pry open the conversation and give people a peek into your values and your motivation without really crossing that line in places where it's not okay to say the word Christian.
Yeah. And I think that I would, that's the answer. I hate to say I would have expected it because I read your book. You talk about some of that stuff in the book. And again, for some of you that are in the BAM community, I want to encourage you to get a copy because Justin has dealt very clearly and very faithfully with all of these questions. This is not some fly by night book. You just touched on something that prompts another question that is in the long list I sent you, which we'll never get through, but I wanted to give you at least some stuff to think about. But you just talked about what, your brand attracts, you said customers, and all of us either have been or will be in a world where we have customers that we really wish we didn't have. They're not the right kind. They're not honest. They're not ethical. They don't pay their bills. They talk bad about. I mean, we've all lived that dream or will. And so I get the idea that branding is what attracts customers. But you made a point in the book, Justin, which I thought was really powerful. And given my background in the employment industry, you said something to the effect that there's a clear relationship, a demonstrable relationship between a clear brand and attracting top shelf employees. So I get the idea that I'm attracting the customers I want. That's what marketing is supposed to do, or part of it. But I don't think people think about the branding. Again, name is not branding. It's that word, it's that story. Talk about how that enables us to attract and retain really top shelf employees, and not necessarily all Christian. Depends on your company strategy, but
absolutely. In the book, we have what we've developed. We call it the high impact brand model. And traditionally in marketing, you have the problem the customer has and the solution that your company offers. When those two things come together, you have a fit, right? The high impact model brings in two additional elements, and that's your values, your why, your beliefs, and your customers and or your potential employees' beliefs, their values, their why. And when those four elements come together, you have a very powerful brand. And that works on the customer side, and that also works on the employee side. And I think that's really the power of being courageous about your brand and your faith. You are going to attract those like-minded, really those team members who have similar values, who want to make a greater impact. And when you're looking at it on the employee side, it's not the customer's problem and your solution. It's their passion and their skill set and your organization's purpose and the thing that you do for the marketplace. So yeah, I think when you can bring those elements together and really help potential team members understand who you are and why you do what you do, not only do you get better team members, but you get team members who are in it for the long haul, and they give you more than someone who's just punching a time clock or a time card.
So is this kind of another way of talking about culture? You're building an internal culture and frankly an external culture. And I remember years ago I was talking with employees at one of my companies, and I would tell them on every new employee orientation why we were so serious about our culture. And one of those reasons is because culture creates fit. We fit somewhere. We don't fit everywhere, and we've all worked for companies where you realize I don't fit here. And this is not about any of those, the bad words about racism or sexism or genderism. And this is not about discrimination of any kind. This is about personally, we all know, just like there are churches where we fit, and there are churches that could be great churches, but you just don't fit. Same thing's true with a company, so it shows you where you fit. But you didn't say this in the book, but I'd love to get your thoughts on it. I also would tell them it shows you where you don't fit. That people will come into a company, they don't fit, and they either leave or they go underground. Leaving is actually healthy when they don't fit. But how do you speak to that in terms of, all right, I'm attracting the people I want, but I'm also kind of either not attracting, repelling, or expelling just by the power of culture and values and brand, those people who they should be somewhere else. Not a shot at them. They should just be somewhere else. How do you speak to that?
I love kind of the Chick-fil-A hiring model. They take a really long time to evaluate people at the higher levels of their company. And, I think that's part of the key is being really intentional and purposeful and patient in the hiring process. And again, putting your values forward so that those people can really understand hey, this is what it looks like to work in this organization. These are the things they value. This is how they create economic, social, and spiritual capital in the world. And I can see myself doing that. I can see myself being a part of that every day.